When you think of a lawyer, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Chances are you're picturing a dramatic courtroom showdown, right? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the real secret weapon of the legal world. It's a skill that has almost nothing to do with what you see on TV, but everything to do with how justice actually gets done.
And here's the wild part. The most critical skill for any lawyer is often the one that law students themselves think is, well, kind of boring. They see it as less important than the big, flashy subjects. They're so focused on the headline courses that they sometimes totally miss the one tool that makes everything else work. So that's the big question we're tackling in this explainer. What is this hidden skill, really? And how does this quiet, behind-the-scenes work form the very backbone of our entire legal system? Let's find out. Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to reveal what a lawyer's day-to-day work actually looks like. And spoiler alert, it's way less about shouting objection and a whole lot more about meticulous, careful preparation. It turns out the reality of being a lawyer is that it's mostly writing. A huge chunk of a lawyer's time is spent at a desk, not in a courtroom. They're drafting super detailed research memos, carefully worded opinion letters for their clients, ironclad business agreements, and all the formal court documents, the pleadings, that get a case off the ground. This is where cases are really won and lost. So this here is the official definition of a competent lawyer. And the keywords you really got to pay attention to are has and applies. See, it's not enough to just know the law. A great lawyer has the practical skills to use that knowledge to actually fix a client's problem. It's all about the application. And that idea of applying knowledge breaks down into these core tasks. This is the real engine of legal work. First, you've got to investigate the facts and figure out the key legal questions. Then, you dive deep into legal research. From there, you do the analysis. You apply the law you found to the specific situation. And finally, and this part's crucial, you write it all down, clearly and persuasively. Okay, so if it's all about research, you might be thinking, why not just Google it? Well, that's where things get tricky in the modern world. There's a huge new challenge that makes this skill more complex and honestly more valuable than ever. You know, the very same technology that gives us instant access to everything has also created what the source material calls the specter of information overload. There's just too much out there. For a lawyer, the challenge isn't just finding information, it's digging through a massive mountain of it to find the right information. And this is how the professionals fight back against that overload. It's a specific skill called legal information literacy. Think of it as a disciplined strategy. Knowing when you need to search, knowing where to look, figuring out if what you found is any good, and then knowing how to use it effectively. So let's break that down. It's really about 4 key things. First, just recognizing when you even need to do research. Second, picking the best sources. Not all databases are created equal. Third is the big one, critically evaluating what you find. Is this source reliable? Is it even relevant anymore? And finally, there's this absolutely vital step called knotting up. That's where you double and triple check that the case you're leaning on is still good law and hasn't been overturned. It's a safety check to make sure your entire argument isn't built on sand. Okay, so how do lawyers actually do this day in and day out? Well, they're not just wandering through a digital library hoping for the best. They have a professional playbook, a systematic way of thinking that lets them tackle any legal problem. First things first, you've got to know your sources. They basically fall into 2 camps. Primary sources are the law. We're talking about the actual statutes passed by governments and the decisions made by judges. Then you have secondary sources, which are materials about the law. Think textbooks, legal journals, stuff like that. Pro tip, a smart researcher often starts with secondary sources to get the lay of the land before diving into the deep end with the primary stuff. But at its absolute heart, all legal research boils down to this really simple but powerful 3-step loop. You find the information, you read it and make sure you understand it, and then you note it up to verify it's still current and valid. Then you just repeat that cycle over and over. It's a constant process of discovery and verification. And this right here, this is the master framework that holds the whole process together. It's called PHLAC, and it's how lawyers bring order to chaos. First, you nail down the facts. Then, you frame the legal issues or questions. Next, you research the relevant law. Then comes the most important part, the analysis, where you actually apply that law to your facts. And finally, you draw a conclusion. It's literally a 5-step path from total confusion to a clear answer. I absolutely love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. This whole research thing isn't something you can just learn from a book. You can't become a great legal researcher just by reading about it. Just like playing the piano, it's a practical skill. You only get better through practice, practice, practice. All right, now let's switch gears and talk about something really practical: money. Because all of this highly specialized expert-level research has a very real cost. Every single click inside a professional legal database can cost a pretty penny, which raises a really tricky question. So who foots the bill? Is it just part of the law firm's cost of doing business, like their rent or the coffee in the break room? Or is it a specific expense that should get passed on to the client? Or maybe even to the person who lost the lawsuit? This whole money question usually pops up in one of two situations. First, a client gets their bill and questions a charge for online research. The second is when the winning side in a lawsuit wants to make the losing side pay for all the research costs they racked up to win the case. And the trend, interestingly, is that courts are more and more likely to say, yeah, these are necessary expenses. So the debate really just boils down to this. Is online research a specific itemized expense for a client that's called a disbursement, or is it just general office overhead, like keeping a physical library full of books used to be? The consensus is definitely shifting. Courts are increasingly seeing this as a legit, necessary, and recoverable cost of practicing law in the 21st century. All right, for our last section, let's talk about the unique language of this whole craft. Because if legal research is the work, then legal citation is the signature. And it's not just some boring formatting rule. It is a seriously powerful tool of the trade. At the end of the day, a standardized citation does two really simple but absolutely vital things. First, it gives credit where it's due, proving you didn't just make this stuff up. And just as important, it gives anyone reading your work a perfect roadmap to find that exact same source for themselves. Now, I know a citation like this can look like a secret code, right? It just looks like a jumble of letters and numbers, but it's not meant to be confusing. You should think of it like a trail of breadcrumbs for a detective. Every single piece, the name, the year, the volume number, is a specific clue that leads you directly to the exact source document, whether it's on a library shelf or in a database. Using proper citation is, quite simply, the mark of a professional. An experienced lawyer can just glance at a citation and know if the source is worth chasing down. They know exactly how to find it. But most of all, it shows that your arguments are built on a solid foundation of real legal authority. It's the ultimate source of credibility. And all this brings us to one final, big thought for the future. As AI search tools get more and more powerful, what happens to this deeply human skill? Does the ability to think critically, to analyze, and to build an airtight argument from meticulously verified sources become even more valuable? Or does technology eventually make it obsolete? That's a huge question, and it's one the next generation of legal pros is going to have to answer.